All right, and now we're to the criminal trial procedure, starting with the very first step all the way to the last step. The misconception is that what you see on TV, they just go right to trial, isn't true. There's many steps in between, and we're going to talk about each of those, including this week's case, which is going to happen on one of those steps. But obviously, the first thing deals with the police. You get your arrest, obviously, after the police do their investigation. They are going to arrest, detain, question, and book the person that they believe is guilty of the crime. One of the things I wanted to remind you, remember, Miranda does not have to be actually spoken until the arrestee is being questioned. So that is a misnomer. It's not at the arrest, but at questioning. Typically, police officers will do it multiple times, though, and make sure it's recorded so that it cannot come back and bite them in the end. Once the person is arrested, then they have to go to booking. In smaller towns, that's going to be at your sheriff's office or your county jail. For Montgomery County, it is the county jail. That's the one we would have been visiting. And for you underclassmen, you'll be visiting there. We're going to try to get it done in the fall. That you'll get a chance to go over and see Montgomery County Correctional. That is, they will handle every booking process in the county. When you go there, and we'll see all of this, the accused is searched, they're photographed, or what's called their mugshot, and then of course they're fingerprinted. They will run them through a database, make sure there's no other outstanding arrest warrants for them. They'll also give them a medical evaluation to make sure that they're healthy, especially with obviously COVID going around, but for other reasons as well, including if they have any kind of infectious diseases, if they have broken appendages, either from their doing or from the police. They also want to make sure that they put down that medical evaluation so that the arrestee doesn't accuse the jail of harming them in any way, and they can go back and say, no, yeah, you came in with this injury, so this is not our fault. Also, if they, somebody has like cancer, stuff like that, they have to make sure they have the proper medication and they can take care of any health problems that they have. Also, that they will turn in all your clothes, and you'll get your handy dandy towel and uniform and your skippy shoes and your toiletries, of course, which you have to pay for. And again, we'll see that when we go to the jail. And then we get to, usually within 24 to 48 hours, we'll have what's called the bail hearing. Now, the bail hearing can happen in one of three ways. You could go actually to the courthouse. In this case, it'd go down to Norristown. You can actually have one over video conference, which we'll see that when we go to the jail, or the jail has its own courtroom if the judge decides to actually go to the jail to have court there. In any of the cases, bail hearing is, like I said, done 24 to 48 hours. And what is going to be happening is the charges are going to be read, and based on the crime itself, what evidence the police have, how high or how dangerous their crime is that they committed, the defendant's record, a whole bunch of other things, and of course the person's character, the judge will decide if this person can be released on bail to come back to all of their different parts of their trial until the actual court trial. So if they feel that any of those things do not meet, maybe they have a higher bail. Usually severity of the crime is the biggest reason. And when that happens, the judge will assign them bail. And once bail is assigned, the person can, if they can afford the bail themselves, they can just pay for it. Or if not, you'll hire a bail bondsman who will put up 90% of the bail. You'll put up the other 10%. And you're released until those times that those dates come up, and you better show up for those dates or you forfeit that bail. And if you're using a bail bondsman, they don't want to lose money, so they use a lot of different techniques to make sure that you get to the court on time at those times. With that said, if you make it through all of that, then the bail bondsman is going to take your 10% as your payment for putting up the rest of the bail. Now, this picture you see here is a young girl named Penelope Soto. This is a video. I will put the link onto the Google Classroom. Make sure you watch this. This is when things go wrong in a bail hearing. Remember we talked about the power of the judge. Well, the judge, after she does some, acts kind of goofy and The judge will, in fact, give her a contempt of court charge. It gets kind of ugly there. So make sure you watch that and understand the power of the judge in the courtroom. Now, the judge can't go too overboard with bail. An arrestee is an accused is defended by the Eighth Amendment, which means there is no excessive bail. So the judge can't go above and beyond what the state laws say is appropriate for whatever reason they're giving that they're there. So soon after we have the bail hearing, whether you get bail or not, you're going to have to go back to court and have what's called the preliminary hearing. The preliminary hearing is that the defendant will appear before the judge to decide if there is enough evidence for the case to go to trial. And in this case, the prosecuting attorney has to prove what's called probable cause to have the trial. In other words, we have enough evidence that this person could have actually committed the crime, and so we will move forward. So what will happen in the preliminary hearing is the prosecutor will read the charges and then give evidence. The defense attorney has the right to challenge that, but typically they do not because they don't care about their client, but because they don't want to tip their hand at what evidence they have. They'd rather save that. And a lot of times, because the defense attorney doesn't raise any objections, it's a pretty good chance that there is enough evidence, or else the DA wouldn't go forward with this process. And so they will rubber stamp, usually about 98% of the time. The preliminary hearing does find enough evidence for the case to go before trial. Now, what can also happen is you have what's called a grand jury hearing, and actually some states require an additional grand jury hearing, others do not. Pennsylvania does not. You can have the grand jury hearing instead of just the preliminary hearing, which is decided by the judge, and you'll sit before 12 to 25 jurors that will decide if there's enough evidence for the case to go further. Again, typically this is only at the time when the prosecutor is going to present information. The defense attorney can, but again, they typically choose not to, not because they don't want to, but because, again, they don't want to give information to the prosecution. Remember, disclosure. They don't want to tip their hand. Now, the prosecutor is already going to have to disclose the information anyway, so they don't want to give too much away, but just enough to make sure that we get that jury to buy into it. Now, you notice 99%. That's gone down a little bit. It's probably about 98% now, but that's still, quite a success rate. And they do tend to be more favorable for the prosecution, especially the grand juries, over the preliminary hearing. Once a preliminary hearing is completed, a successful one, the grand jury or the judge will give an indictment. So if you've heard the term and somebody was indicted, that means they were formally charged by the state or the feds against a specific individual for that particular crime. So those crimes will be listed out. So an indictment is that formal charge of whatever that crime is that the defendant is being accused of. And now that means that we know what the formal charges, and it can be multiple. It does not have to be just one. It can be multiple indictments there to officially charge the defendant. And soon after we have that, we have what's called the arraignment. Now, the arraignment is the accused or the defendant's chance to basically notify the court whether this process will go on. What do I mean by that? Well, in the Fifth Amendment, the accused is afforded the right to have the charges heard against them in open court. So what the judge is going to do is they're going to read that indictment. In the Casey Anthony case, for example, it was first-degree murder, involuntary manslaughter, parent neglect, and, of course, the 4 counts of lying to the police. So that's what the judge would have read off to Jose Baez, Casey Anthony's attorney. And so then the defendant's job is to say one of 3 answers, at least in Pennsylvania. Not every state has the third answer, but it's guilty, not guilty, or no contest. You can plead no contest. Now, what is no contest? That means I'm not going to challenge the charges. So what's the point of that? Well, basically, you're saying you're guilty without actually saying you're guilty. For example, if it's an assault case and the other person goes to sue the defendant, if they've pled guilty, they can use that in their civil case to say, hey, they've already admitted to doing it. But if you plead no contest, you cannot use it against them because they never admitted to doing it. They just said they weren't going to challenge it. So PA does allow for a no contest charge. So there's 3 actual answers there to the arraignment: guilty, not guilty, or no contest. If you're going to plead guilty or no contest, then we're going to skip the rest of the trial phase and go right to sentencing. And sometimes prosecutors will give a break to the defendant if they just admit to the crime. That doesn't always have to happen, but it's possible. If we are not guilty, then we are going to prepare a trial, and the judge will assign a trial date, and we'll go from there. So what happens after the arraignment, but before we actually get to the trial? Well, typically in a criminal case, it's anywhere from 9 to 12 months in PA. So let's look what happens during that 9 to 12 months. First thing is, it could be some plea bargaining. This happens quite often. Plea bargaining occurs probably in over 90% of cases. Actually here, 95, there you go. And so what happens is the prosecutor and the defense attorney, now that we know the formal charges, they will basically try to negotiate a deal of what is the appropriate punishment for this criminal. Of course, it's always subject to the approval of the judge. The judge can deny that plea bargain, but most of the time they do not, and usually they come up with a fair compromise. So why do we have so many plea bargains? Well, basically everybody wins. And how do you think everybody wins? Well, let's take a look. For the prosecution, it's a guaranteed conviction. Remember, we talked about police when they get their clearance rates up. Well, for a prosecutor, the more they win, the better they look, the better they chance for a promotion. So we want a guaranteed conviction. Number 2, it saves time and money for the state and also for the attorney, because then they can move on to another case. 3, again, they're representing the government, but they also, they have the interests of the victims in mind. And again, they try to get that guaranteed victory, which is a good thing. And then now, part of the gamesmanship between the prosecution and the defense, the prosecution may overcharge to raise their position in plea bargaining. So in other words, they might hit you up with every type of crime that they can think of. Conversely, the defense attorney might offer more pretrial motions, motion to dismiss this evidence, motion to continue, blah, 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 blah. And they're trying to prolong the process, which doesn't work in the prosecutor's favor. So, they'll say, hey, I'll get rid of this motion if you get rid of this charge. And usually it ends up being pretty close after they're all done. So what does the defense attorney get out of this? Well, they get lesser punishment for their client. Clients talk, hey, I got a good deal, this is a good attorney, might end up going back to them again. And again, it's expedient, which helps defense attorneys. They're in it to make money, so the more clients we can get, the more money we can make. So for the defendant, well, they get control over their fate. And for most people, if you can decide your own fate, then you're happy with that. And so defendants typically like to say that they had control over that decision. And a lot of times the sentence is less than what's being charged. So if I end up with a lighter sentence, so be it. For the victims or the family of the victims, in Pennsylvania now, at the sentencing stage, the victim's family or the victim themselves can talk to the judge and tell them why the defendant should get a longer sentence, something like that. So they get a voice in it. And for the courts, it's expedient. So remember, I told you 9 to 12 months, and that's because 95% of them are plea bargain. Can you imagine if only 50% were plea bargain? That would mean that we're talking 10 years before criminals get to trial. That's insane and absurd. So plea bargaining is a very useful tool to keep the courts expedient and to make sure that the courts run smoothly. All right, so we will continue this. We got a couple more things before the trial, and then we're going to start the trial process in our next video.